Featured speaker is Dr. Sue Johnson. Dr. Johnson is an author, clinical psychologist, researcher, professor, presenter, and speaker, and leading innovator in the field of couple therapy and adult attachment. Sue is the primary developer of emotionally focused couples and family therapy, which has demonstrated its effectiveness in over 30 years of peer-reviewed clinical research. Sue Johnson is the founding director of the International Center for Excellence in Emotionally Focused Therapy and distinguished research professor at Alliant University in San Diego, California, as well as Professor Emeritus Clinical Psychology at the University of Ottawa, Canada. Dr. Johnson received a variety of awards acknowledging her development in EFT and her significant contribution to the field of couple and family therapy and adult attachment. Sue has been appointed as a member of the Order of Canada, the country's highest civilian honor, recognizing outstanding achievement, dedication to the community, and services to Canada. In 2016, she was named Psychologist of the Year by the APA and has been honored by the AAMFT for her outstanding contribution to the field of couple and family therapy. As author of the best-selling book, Hold Me Tight, 7 Conversations for a Lifetime of Love, Sue has created for the general public a self-help version of her groundbreaking research about relationships, how to enhance them, how to repair them, and how to keep them. Her most recent book, Love Sense, The Revolutionary New Science of Romantic Relationships, outlines the new logical understanding of why and how we love, based on new scientific evidence and cutting-edge research. Sue trains counselors in EFT worldwide and consultants to the 50 international institutes and affiliate centers who practice EFT. She lives in Victoria, Canada with her husband. She endures Argentine tango and kayaking on Canada's North Lakes. And with that, I am honored to introduce and welcome Sue Johnson.
I hope you can hear me. I'm assuming you can hear me, okay? Gee, that was quite an intro. I think I should go and have a holiday now. It's interesting listening to that. Probably part of it that you didn't think was terribly important, I'm going to suggest to you is important, which is that I dance Argentine tango. And what I'm going to suggest to you about that is, if you take all the silly cliches about Argentine tango as some sort of strange, kind of over-sexualized, bizarre thing that you see on Dancing with the Stars, and you just put that aside for a minute. If you go into any of your cities all across the world and you watch regular people dance Argentine tango, what you will see is the same thing as you see in a good therapy session. What you will see in the dances that are really, that make you, that hold your attention and that somehow thrill you to watch it, you won't see all the sexualized cliches, it's not like that. What you will see is a whole process of attunement. You will see two human beings, sometimes strangers, standing up in front of each other and tuning into each other. And it's an emotional and a physical tuning in. And then you will see them tune in and begin to respond to each other. And the music, of course, helps. And in relationships, emotion is the music that organizes the dance. So here you have the music, which has emotion embedded in it. Tango music is very emotional. So you have this structure, and the two of you are listening to this music, and the idea is that you tune into the music and each other, and you move as one. You coordinate. You coordinate movement, and you move as one. And that connection, for reasons that I think you can only understand if you really think of us as bonding mammals, human beings as bonding mammals, that connection is deeply, deeply enthralling, deeply moving, and deeply filled with joy. And so I'm talking to you about from the point of view of somebody who's addicted to Argentine tango, you understand. So I might as well just tell you that right off the bat. But that's what I'm addicted to, what I've just said to you, and it's the same thing that still enthralls me and fascinates me and keeps me wanting to practice therapy, whether it's with individuals, whether it's with couples, or whether it's with families, is these moments when you meet somebody and you tune into them and you respond to them and they come and meet you, and together you move into a coordinated dance that can go in a different direction, can really go in any direction. And there is something inherently beautiful about that. I think our nervous system is wired to respond to what I'm talking about. What that means is that the two people have got to be completely present. And for me, that is something that is missing sometimes these days in our therapy training, that we teach students to stay in their heads, to think about ideas, to use manuals. We don't teach them very much about how to go in and keep their balance, keep their emotional balance, and learn to be completely present with their clients. So right there, it's important, I think what I'm saying is, it's inherent in this model that I dance tango, and I'm going to tell you about a structured intervention in a little bit of time, a little bit later, called the EFT tango. And it's not accident that it's called the EFT tango, because for me, tango is a context of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to talk to you for about an hour about EFT, which my son calls extremely funny therapy. So, you know, he's the kind of son who was appalled at the idea when I said to him, would you like to become a psychologist or a therapist? He looked at me like I was crazy. He's a planner, he wants to build cities. Okay, so, but he calls it extremely funny therapy. And indeed, when EFT first started out, I think that was a good title for it, because it was considered extremely funny in that when I first started studying couples and seeing couples and families and taping my sessions because I didn't understand what was going on and I couldn't find any maps in the books in the library, the kind of conclusions I was coming to were considered extremely funny by the field. First of all, if you think about it, it was extremely unpopular at the beginning of the 80s to the idea that you would go into a distressed family and actually stay with their emotions and talk about their emotions, or you would go into it with a distressed couple and you would use the emotion and track the emotion as the main process in your therapy, was considered dysfunctional. People would say to me, you know, no, that's crazy. What you do is you teach them to think differently about the emotion, you teach them to control the emotion, you teach them skills, you teach them different perspectives and insights. The last thing you want to do is go into the emotion. Now, I wasn't talking about catharsis. Catharsis is just ventilation. EFT's never done any of that. That's a waste of time. But, you know, the feedback I got was that EFT was pretty weird because we privileged emotion. And we still privilege emotion. It's the most powerful thing in the room, especially with couples and families. So it seems to me if it's the most powerful thing in the room, you need it on your side. You need to understand it, be able to regulate it, and then you need to be able to use it to create change. After all, if emotion is the music of the dance between intimates, the fastest and easiest way to change the dance is to change the music. And if you don't change the music, you're doing an uphill battle with any other kind of change. So it was EFT strange and funny because we privileged emotion, we trusted emotion, if you like. We believed that emotion was adaptive and that we could follow it through therapy and it would kind of lead us somewhere. The other reason that EFT was considered very strange was because my model of relationships was all about attachment. And these days, it is not considered so strange. In the last 10 years, people have started to listen to attachment theory and science in a different way. But certainly when EFT started, I would stand up and say, you know, I talk about emotion and how to use emotion, and then I talk about bonding and how the bond between a couple and the bonds in a family, that you had to use John Bowlby's view of bonding. The science was really, at that point, all about infants and mothers. And that dependency, there was nothing wrong with dependency. And your job in a couple and in a family therapy would create constructive dependency. I was like a heretic, okay? I was considered strange and very funny indeed. So what I'm going to tell you is that, thank goodness, that's changed a bit. And I'm basically going to talk to you about the fact, and if you're interested in this, you can look on my website for lots of talks. You can look on www.iceeft.com. That's our international institute. We have all kinds of training tapes. We have every piece of research that's on EFT or article on EFT is listed on there. You can go to those sites. What I also hope is that you'll consider looking at my new book, which is coming out in January with Guildford, called Attachment Theory in Practice, EFT with Individuals, Couples and Families. And what I basically say in that new book, I've said it all along, but I think I say it in a more direct way, is that from my point of view, the field of psychotherapy in general is in chaos. There are over 1,000 models of therapy. There are new spiffy interventions that are all, sometimes they're called by different names, but they're the same thing. It's all about marketing all the time. Every time you turn around, there's a new disorder. It seems to me that this is chaos. And that promise that we were given a few years ago, which was, it wasn't going to be chaos, we were going to find a way to integrate it all, because we were going to focus on research and all be empiricists. That seems to me not to have worked. For one thing, many studies are irrelevant to clinicians. If you tell me, I do outcome studies and process of change studies. If you tell me that you found a fantastic outcome in therapy, I don't really care as a clinician unless you can tell me exactly how you got that change, and I can do it in my session. So in EFT, we've done a lot of outcome research, and we can tell you that we can create change in couples. We've only done one study in families. We're about to do a study with individuals. We can tell you we can create change. We can even tell you that in couples, we can create not just increased satisfaction, we can create more secure attachment, which is quite a shift from just increasing satisfaction. We can tell you that we have great follow-ups, that our results last. But if I cannot also tell you that we have 9 process of change studies that tells you exactly how we get those results, I feel like I lose you as clinicians. So what I say in this new book is that it seems to me that whatever therapy you're doing, individual, couple, or family, that you need a base. You need a base, a grounding in how you see human beings. You need to have a clear stance of how you see human beings. And what I talk about is that attachment science at this point in time offers us the most profound, well-researched with thousands of studies. The adult attachment stuff is only about 15 years, 20 years old, but there's still hundreds of studies there. That attachment science offers us the best grounding in a developmental theory of personality that tells us who we are. And when you have a theory like that, that is so clear and tells us who we are bonding mammals. It tells us who we are, then we can also understand how we get stuck in various mental disorders and in distressed relationships. We can also understand what health looks like, and we can also understand what we have to do as therapists to get from stuck and disconnected from ourselves and other people to a model of health. So what I'm suggesting is we have to find a clear platform to base psychotherapy in this century on, and there is no clearer and more significant platform than attachment theory. And that applies also to individual therapy. If you're sitting there wondering, well, attachment theory is about relationships, how does it apply if you're doing individual therapy? I'm going to suggest to you that you still live in a totally relational world, even when you're sitting by yourself in a room meditating. Most of the time, you're talking to other people in your head. You're imagining how other people will respond to you. Other people are your context. And the self is a process that is ongoing and is always influenced by your sense of the people around you, especially whether the people around you are safe. Whether you have at least 2 or 3 people on this planet who will come when you call. What attachment basically says, if we think about it in adult terms, and I talk about this in Love Sense, a book I wrote for the public, what it basically says is that love is not a strange mixture of sex and sentiment. It's an ancient, wired-in survival code. It's designed to keep the people who are precious to you, that you can depend on, close to you. And your brain is designed to go into alarm and anxiety when you do not know how to keep those people close to you, and you cannot keep a safe emotional connection with those people. That is a very specific view of who we are as human beings. And it has very clear implications. For one thing, what John Bowlby basically said is this is an emotional process. We are emotional beings. Safety for us is about experienced emotional connection with others. You can even say that in terms of spirituality. If I talk to some of my Christian colleagues, for example, they talk to me about their sense of connection with God, right? They talk about that as a refuge, a source of strength. So what attachment basically does is it puts together self and a relational system. It says we're relational beings, we're always relating to others, whether it's in our head, in our imagination, in our conversations, in our sense of who we are, how worthy we are. We're always dealing with issues of how alone we are or how connected we are. This is our existential reality. And it's the existential reality your clients live in when you're seeing them as individuals, couples, or families. It's the same stuff. But attachment, and by implication EFT, it's not just a way of intervening. EFT is not just a way of intervening. It's a way of seeing through an attachment lens, seeing people through an attachment lens, and it's a way of being with people. So before we start thinking about intervention, basically I see people through an attachment lens. I see key issues in people's lives as being about emotional disconnection from others, lack of safe connection with others. So from my point of view, when a distressed couple come in my office, they'll tell me the problem is that they fight. Well, all couples fight. Happy couples fight, unhappy couples fight. What we know from the research is the difference is that happy couples don't stay in the fight, they're not trapped in it. They can turn back towards each other and reach for each other and create positive interactions. So from our point of view, the key issue in a distressed relationship with couples is emotional disconnection. Not differences between people. All people are different. I just celebrated my 30th wedding anniversary yesterday, and basically my husband and I are like every other couple in the world. We're basically incompatible. We've pushy, passionate, rather impossible human beings, okay? And that's why it's been fun. But the thing that we've been able to do is create this safe emotional connection. Safe connection with another person tranquilizes your nervous system. Your nervous system recognizes safe connection with another person as ultimate security and safety. It's a platform for you to stand on. By implication, disconnection and lack of responsiveness from the people you care about, expectations of vigilance for and expectations of rejection and abandonment are inherently alarming, and your nervous system codes that as dangerous for you. And I want you to just think about that as a very basic baseline for when you think about people here. From our point of view then, the kind of change we're trying to get in EFT, which is to a deeper sense of connection with reliable, responsive others, to an inner sense of that and a way of creating that, knowing how to create that in your relationships. That is a wired-in, sought-after, longed-for change. We don't create our effects in EFT, I don't believe, because we're so clever. I mean, it does have something to do with the fact that we've worked like crazy, a whole team of us, researchers and clinicians, for 30 years on this, but it's not because we're so clever. It's because we tune into this incredibly powerful, survival-orientated system that has organized your nervous system and the neurons in your brain over millions of years of evolution. So, to give you an example, when a couple sit in my office, no matter how distressed they are, what I assume is that they're there because there is a longing to feel this sense of safe connection. That longing is wired in. And there is pain, whether they can talk about it or not. There is, and I mean that literally. I don't mean an idea of pain. I'm not talking in metaphors. I mean there is pain from feeling abandoned or rejected or not able to connect with others, not being worthy of connection. We know from neuroscience these days that rejection by other people is registered in the same part of the brain and in the same way as physical pain. Of course it is, because stepping on a nail and looking into the eyes of someone you depend on and seeing rejection and contempt are both danger cues for your brain. And they're registered in the same part of the brain and in the same way. So what attachment does is it gives us a map to people's internal emotional worlds, people's longings, people's pain, people's fears. And John Bowlby talked about, who's the father of attachment theory, privileged emotion. He didn't quite know what to do with it clinically. After all, he only had one lifetime. He was a bit busy. He didn't know what to do with it, but he privileged emotion. And he certainly, if you watch the few clinical examples of him that he talks about in his writings, he comes across rather like an EFT therapist, in that he comes across as a Rogerian experiential therapist who listens to people, who believes what they say, who comes across as caring about their pain, and who sees their emotion and their pain as perfectly reasonable. Right? John Bowlby said, and I think Carl Rogers would have loved this, if you understand the attachment context, everything that people do and all the emotions they show you is perfectly reasonable. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about attachment, it's not because it's fascinating intellectually, it's simply the best model of human functioning we have. It's not because of all the brilliant research studies. In the end, I'm passionate about attachment because it never lets me down in a clinical session. over 35 years with all kinds of different individuals, couples and families. It's never let me down. It always, if I get lost, I go back, I put my attachment glasses on, I listen to the emotion in terms of attachment, and I always find my way. What my client is doing always makes sense. So for me, that makes attachment invaluable. So attachment tells me how to see people and their basic existential realities. It tells me what matters. It allows me to focus and be on target with people. It also tells me how to be with people. You know, our field in many ways seems to have fallen in love with the magical therapist who's a magician from the outside, who creates fantastically fascinating, tricky interventions that can just trick people into change. Well, what attachment basically says is something very simple. People grow when they feel safe and responded to. People will explore difficult things when they have someone standing beside them who is safe and who can help them order their experience. So in EFT, the therapist is real, genuine. Rogers, I think, would have loved EFT. We used him as a basis for developing our interventions years ago. You know, basically, the EFT therapist is present with the client, tunes into the client, and reflects the client's reality. I'm constantly using empathic reflection all through my sessions. And when I do that, I do it in a focused way where the client feels held, their emotion is regulated, they feel seen and understood, and as they talk to me about their emotions, as I reflect them and make sense of them, I order their experience. As I order their experience for them, I slow down the emotions and I order it. If you're going to work with emotion, you have to believe that it's basically functional. If you see it as the enemy or you want to ignore it, you can't do this. But if you're going to work with emotion, you have to believe that it's useful and functional for people. You have to kind of trust it. You have to slow it down. Emotion is fast. It's not illogical, but it's fast. And so when I reflect constantly in my sessions, I'm slowing the processing down of experience. I'm making people feel safe. And as they talk to me about their experience, I reflect it, I validate it, and I order it. So to give an example, when I see Jacob and his family at the Children's Hospital, all the other clinicians are obsessed with Jacob's aggressive behavior. Jacob is 11. He has all kinds of wild problems. He's incredibly intelligent. He's massively anxious. He licks his face all the time. His whole of his lower face is raw from licking. And he's violent at home. He threatens to kill his parents. He destroys furniture. He refuses to listen to his father. And all the clinicians in the hospital are trying to control Jacob's behavior. So what I want to know is how Jacob's behavior makes sense. I want to know, so I go in and Jacob says, first of all, I have to find a way to be with Jacob. Jacob says, I don't want to be here. I say, hey, Jacob, I don't want to be here either. It's Friday afternoon. Right? Who wants to be here in this? And he says, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be Peter Pan. I say, okay, if you're Peter Pan, can I be Tinkerbell? He says, maybe. Right? So he's given me an open door. So I go in, where you go and you meet the client where they're at. You don't try and change them, you join with them. You join with them first, right? So I go in and I say, Jacob, could you help me understand? You're angry. Who's the person you're angriest at? And he points to his father. You won't even look at his father. I say, oh, you're angry at Steve. And he nods. And I just start talking about his anger. And when you do You get so angry, your anger gets big, and then you do things. He says, yes, I do things. And I say, and you tell your dad really wild things like that you want to kill him, and I say, you must have. Can you help me understand? And we sit and we talk about his anger. And I don't tell him not to be angry, and I don't try to give him skills, and I don't do that, all those things. I join him in his anger, and I assume it's all about attachment. So I talk about the last time he was angry, and I talk about what happened the moment before he got angry. And what you hear is what you always hear. It's always about attachment. It's the same in couples. It's always about attachment. If you listen underneath the content level of what's going on, they can be talking about sex, parenting, or finances. In the end, the fight is really about attachment. Jacob looks to me and says, he's not home, he's not my dad. I said, oh, he's not home, he's not your dad. So you don't feel like you have a dad? No, I don't have a dad. And then we sit and we talk about what's it like to be a little boy of 11 and not have a dad. And suddenly Jacob and I are in this bubble, and he's talking to me about the fact that he's a little boy of 11 who's bullied at school and he doesn't have a dad, right? And I know this is difficult for Steve to listen to, and it's difficult for Steve's wife too, but I'm talking to Jacob about this. And I say, so little boys want to be able to turn to their dad and know that their dad is with them and is going to help them. And Jacob shakes his head. And we talk, and Jacob gets to the point where I say, if you, in the moments when you're not so angry, if you could ask your dad for something, what would you do? Jacob shocks me. He turns full on to Steve, and he puts his arms out like this. And then you see the attachment drama that all this violence is really about. Jacob reaches his arms out to Steve, and Steve pushes his chair back and coughs and touches his throat and looks away and stares at the rug. That's what's going on in this family, okay? And then Steve's wife becomes very agitated, and starts talking about how busy her husband is and how difficult her son is, and I calm her and soothe her and put my hand on her arm, and I stay with the drama, and I talk to Steve about what just happened. I go into the attachment drama, which is emotionally loaded. I talk to Steve and I say, Steve, what happens to you when your son turns and reaches out for you? And listen to what he says. He can't even process it. He said, did he reach for me? He said, yes. And I replay it. He put his arms out like this, and he said, right? Didn't you, Jacob? Is that what you did? Jacob nods. He said, what happens to you, Steve? He said, I don't know. And I stay there with him. I try and support him. He's lost his balance. He's lost his emotional balance. Something's happening with him. He can't process what's going on, right? He looks at me with a desperation in his eyes, and he says, I don't know what to do. And we stay there. We stay there with, I don't know what to do. And I validate him, and I hold him, and I talk about how parenting is hard, and everyone assumes that we know how to do it, but we don't know how to do it. What happened to him when he was a boy, when he felt he needed holding? He said, nobody helped me. If I was upset, I was sent to my room. I was told, suck it up, buttercup. Right? We all know that one. I'm English, I know that one. Okay. So then I start talking to Steve, and I go in and I work with Steve, and I process what's going on with him emotionally, and I'll talk to you about how I do that in a moment. And I get to the place where Steve could actually talk to me with sadness in his face and say, I don't know how to be a dad. and I validate that and how difficult that is. And then when he's kind of coherent and got his feet under him, I turn that more open sadness and lack of knowledge, lack of confidence, that new emotion into a new signal to his son. I take it out into the new interpersonal reality, into a new dance with his son. I say, can you tell him? Steve, can you tell Jacob, please? Can you tell him, Jacob, I'm not sure I know how to be your dad. I'm not sure I know how to respond to you. You know, can you do that? And Steve immediately starts to do it. And he not only says, Jacob, I don't know what to do when you reach for me. He says, Jacob, I get scared of your anger. And I say, and then what do you do, Steve? He says, well, when he gets angry, I give him rules. And I tell him I stay away from him. And I give him rules. And I tell him what to do. And then we talk about the impact of that on Jacob. Jacob is trying to reach for his dad. He's doing it badly. He's doing it with lots of rage and frustration, but he's trying to reach for him. And you know, Steve just sees the anger and he gives him rules. And the more rules Steve gives him, the more Jacob feels uncared for. Jacob says, you don't care about me, you just care about the rules in the house. I want you to notice that what I'm doing here, I'm going into this emotional drama, making sense of it, and I'm working with people's emotion. I'm getting them to regulate their emotion differently, and then I'm turning it into new responses in the drama, yeah? So I'm coming from a frame where the problem is disconnection, which alarms everybody and pushes everybody off balance. Pushes people into hyper-arousal or numbing. Jacob's hyper-aroused, his dad is numbed out. The problem is disconnection. The solution is moments, more and more moments of safe emotional connection between the two people. Yeah. 2 sessions later, Steve who's actually been able to talk about parenting, and you know, they've had amazing discussions, Steve and Jacob, where Jacob says things like, dads don't usually say this thing. Are dads supposed to say this? Are dads supposed to be sad? Right? And I say, that's hard for you, Jacob. You can't understand that dads can be sad sometimes. So they actually start to expand their model of the other person. And Jacob starts to be able to talk about how lonely he is and how desperate he gets inside in the moment before he gets enraged. And Steve starts to be able to talk about how he feels like a failure as a father. Now, I only do a certain amount of that with Jacob. I mostly talk to Steve about that sense of failure in the session with his wife, because his wife can then start to support him then. So I want you to get a feel for that with a family. It's the same thing with a couple, and you can see us working with a couple in lots of training tapes in EFT. EFT goes through 3 stages. First of all, you join with people, you connect with their emotion, you help them you accept their emotion, you help them make sense of their emotion, you create safety, and you look at the negative dance they have going with other people. Even if it's in their head, you look at the negative dance they have going with other people, and you look at that dance and how the dance they have with other people creates this emotional chaos or emotional numbing, and then how the emotional numbing feeds back into the dance. You look at the whole thing with people, and you help people understand the dance they're caught in with others. So, you know, Steve, if you see any anger in Jacob, you get alarmed, you don't know how to deal with it, you feel bad inside, so you step back away from him and you give him rules. And Jacob, what you hear is your dad just giving you rules, but you're longing for him to turn and hold you and come close and be a dad and help you with your feelings of fear. He doesn't do that. So he gives you rules, tells you what to do, and you just start to get upset and angry. And the angrier you get, Steve, the more you give him rules, and the more rules you get, Jacob, the more angry you get, and both of you are stuck in this dreadful dance. So we help people see the recurring pattern of interpersonal relationships, the dance they get caught in, that leaves them both off balance, anxious, in chaos, right, unable to think clearly. If you have no balance, you cannot choose how you step. Let's take the tango analogy. If I'm off balance, I cannot choose where I step. I just fall. If I have my emotional balance and my physical balance, I can choose where to step. And it's the same with people. Once Steve starts to be able to deal with how inadequate he feels as a father, how he doesn't know what to do with his own or his kids' vulnerability, he starts to have some choice. He doesn't just start to give rules, he starts to share with Jacob on a different level. So the whole relationship starts to change. The first stage of EFT, we look at people's interpersonal patterns where they define themselves and other people, and we help them see the dance they're caught in. We help them see how the way they interact with others confirms their sense of self and vice versa, and we help them see that. And we help them see that the dance is the issue. Jacob's not a bad kid. Steve's not a bad dad. He doesn't always know what to do. It's the dance they're caught in that's the issue. People like this. Nobody has to be the bad guy in EFT. We're just human beings caught in these emotional dances we don't understand, losing our balance, and responding in ways that make it difficult for other people to come in and support us when we need them the most. So we go in and we de-escalate negative patterns. We help people understand negative patterns. You know, the negative patterns, if you're doing individual therapy, even come out with you. And you can comment on the negative patterns that's happening between you and the client. You de-escalate negative patterns. Once people can see where they're caught in their lives, in the emotional music they play, and in the interactions with others that are important to them, then they have a certain ability to regulate their emotions. And in stage 2 of EFT, we start helping them take risks and move into creating more positive patterns. In individual therapy, that might look like somebody imagining seeing their father in their mind and talking to their father in a new way that they've never dared to talk to their father at all. In couples therapy, it's turning to your partner and sharing what's going on with you. In family therapy, it would be Jacob turning to his father and talking about how alone and scared he is instead of how angry he is. And Steve being able to talk to Jacob about how he wants to be a good dad and he wants to come close, but he doesn't always know how. So we create positive patterns of closeness, safe connection, emotional regulation. And it's really about restructuring attachment. Safe connection with other people is the thing that builds resilience and thriving in human beings. It's the most basic building block of mental health and resilience and personality growth. The last stage is consolidation. So if you look at what an EFT therapist is doing all the time, I'm always empathically reflecting people's reality. I'm always accepting their emotion as logical and as making sense, right? I'm always staying with them in that emotion. Sorry, that's distracting me. I didn't turn my phone off. Go away. But if you watch me, what I'm doing is I'm doing a set sequence of interactions. It might look more intense or less intense in different stages of therapy, depending what I'm doing. But if you watch me, an EFT therapist who's using an attachment frame is always doing what we call the EFT tango. And this grounds me. It means that when I get lost in therapy, I come back to this sequence of interactions. I come back to listening to the emotion. I come back to being present with the client. This grounds me, right? So what is the EFT tango? And if you do not know this, if you wish, I will send you a slide of this that you can all share. Okay, it has 5 steps. The first thing you do in EFT is you look at the interpersonal drama that is happening between you and the client, between the client and the attachment figures in their head, between the partners in the couple, in the family members, you look at the different family members and how they interact. You look at the interpersonal process, and you look at the dance and the emotion that's driving the dance. Emotions organize interactions between intimates. So if you are going to change the key organizing factor in relationships, you have to change the emotional music. Anything else is just addressing the symptoms. So you go in and you reflect the emotional music. Jacob, you show your dad how angry you are. You don't show your dad your sadness. Steve, you give your kid rules. You don't ever share with him that you care for him, but you don't always know how to be with him, right? That it's difficult to be a dad sometimes, right? You go into that emotion and you make sense of the moves in the dance with the emotion. You help people see the dance they're caught in. With a couple, you say, John, you push for sex all the time. And what I'm hearing is it's not about having high testosterone. It's about the fact that you're never sure this lady loves you. And the one time you're sure is when you're actually penetrating her in sex. Then for a moment you believe that she belongs to you. So you push for sex. And the more you push for sex, right, Mary, the more you feel intruded upon and demanded and blamed and criticized because you're not sexy enough, the more you shut down and numb out because it's painful to be criticized by someone you depend on and you love, literally painful, it hurts. And you shut down and you move away and you numb out. And the more you numb out, Mary, John, the more sure you are that she doesn't love you and the more you push. You guys are caught in this dreadful pattern of push and move away, shut down. And Mary, when you shut down, you shut John out. And John, when you're shut out, you get desperate and you just want more sex. He said, if she loved me, she'd make love to me twice a day. Right? And she'd have 4 orgasms every time. I'm already exhausted when he says that. So to prove to this man that he's loved, you've got to have 8 orgasms a day. It's like, you've got to be kidding me, man. Like, you know. Anyway, but no, he's not kidding. Because his desperation it's not about sexual desire. It's about desperation, right? And so, so we look at the dance they're caught in, and I'm safe for both people. So we look at the process, the present process. I stay in the present. We look at the present process, the interpersonal and the emotional process that's going on. We look at the dance and the emotion and we say, oh, this is what's happening here right now. Right now, what is happening here? That is step 1 of the tango. Step 2 of the tango is I go into the emotional music. I go into John's talking about what happens in the moment when she turns away from him. And I go into this empty sense of desperation he has. I go into the underlying emotions that are really driving this dance. This empty sense of desperation, how he's sure, he's always been sure that this woman doesn't really want him. That she married him on the rebound. She was really in love with his best friend. And he's always knows this. She's had 5 children with him. She's been with him for 25 years, okay? And he knows, right? And he's caught up in this desperation. So instead of talking about his sexuality, which is what he wants to talk about, we're talking about his desperation and how it's not even about sex, it's about touch, it's about soothing, it's about feeling important to somebody, right? And he starts to be able to talk about the desperation. And he goes into it, I go into it with him. Step 2, the emotional music changes. He's not pushing her for sex, he's talking about his desperateness and how he needs this proof that he's cared for. Step 3, you take the new emotion and create a new dance that has the promise of more connection in it. John, can you turn to her? Can you tell her, please? Can you turn to her and tell her what you just told me? That you're never sure in this relationship that you matter to her. That you're never sure that she really chose you. That you're never sure you're loved. And the only time you feel loved is when you're actually making love. So you get desperate to make love. Can you tell her? And he tells her. That's step 3. There's a new dance that happens. He tells her. Okay, he's moved from pushy, demanding pursuer to somebody who's more open and present. He's more accessible. The basis for a secure bond is emotional accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement. And what we're getting people to take little steps towards in EFT is emotional accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement. So he tells her he's more open. Step 4 of the tango, we help the people in the interaction look at the new steps they've done. I say to John, what did it feel like to tell Mary about that desperation? You know, have you ever done that before? He said, are you kidding? I never even put it together before. You know, I never put it together. My doctor told me I had high testosterone. Right? So I said, so what does it feel like to tell her? And people always say this. You can talk about very painful things. If you do it with a safe person and they order your experience for you, there's something about that is positive. So he says, it feels good. It feels weird. It feels strange. I've never talked to anybody like this before, but it feels good to tell her that I feel desperate. I say, good. So he's now looking at and reflecting the new step he took in the dance. I turn to her and I say, Mary, what's it like for you to hear him say this? And she says, well, it sure feels a lot better than him pushing me for sex all the time. I guess some part of me knows he's desperate, but I never heard him say it before. I need him to say it. So I say, that's amazing, guys. She's more responsive. He's more open, she's more responsive. So you've got a moment there where there's more connection. And then you do step 5 of the tango, which is you say, look at what you did. You take the new drama and you say, look at what you did, right? And you summarize it for them. And you validate the hell out of them. You don't validate the way conservative professional adults validate other people. You don't say, look at what you did, guys, that was jolly good. That's a waste of time. You're an attachment surrogate at this point. You're an attachment figure. So I want you to think about validating new steps that people take into their emotions and towards each other, engaging with others, the way you see a mother validate a child who takes a risk. When the little kid goes and puts his toe in the lake, the mother doesn't say, that's good, Johnny, jolly good. The mother says, wow! Look at what you just did! That's amazing! You put your toe in the lake! Oh my God! I'm going to tell your Daddy, John, come and see what he did. He put his toe in the lake. You are such a brave boy. That is so brave. You are taking people into foreign territory. When they take a risk and they go into a new emotional reality and step into a new dance, you validate the hell out of them. You say, look at what you just did. Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. Steve, you told me that you never got a hug from your dad, that you were told to go away and be by yourself if you hurt. And right here, right now, you turned to Jacob with tears in your eyes and you said to him, I do want to be a good dad to you, Jacob. I just don't always know how. Wow, I'm blown away by that, Steve. That takes such courage, Steve. I'm amazed you can do that. That's incredible. And then I'll validate him another way. You know, we all have problems parenting. None of us know how to do it. We're making it up as we go along. One of the astounding things that stands out for me, I was asked to comment on Mnuchin's work a couple of times last year. And one of the astounding things that stands out for me, and I thought Mnuchin was wonderful for bringing systems theory into families. I admired him. But goodness me, he ignores emotion. And goodness me, from my point of view, he does not validate how difficult parenting is for most parents and how they feel ashamed of not knowing how to do it. And we do that a whole lot in EFT. Right? Actually, Mnuchin was very sweet about it. He said it to me a couple of times. I make big mistakes. I make big mistakes. I hold the emotion. And last time he said it, I just couldn't resist. I said, yes, Sal, you make big mistakes. Okay. So the EFT Tango, you reflect the present process, the emotion, the music and the dance people are caught in, and it's always about attachment. You go deeper into the emotional music and you start to shift the music in terms of coming with the softer, more vulnerable feelings that people don't talk about. Step 3, you take that new music, you turn it into a new way of engaging with the other person. You turn it into new signals for a new dance. Step 4, you look at the new dance. Look at what you just did. Isn't that amazing? Step 5, you validate. You validate. When you do this again and again, I want you to think about the message in the validation. When I validate people taking a risk and a new step in therapy with me, what is the message I give? The message I give is, you can do this. You are competent. We are all learning all the time. You are just a human being struggling. We are all struggling. You can do this. Relationships make sense. Emotions make sense. You can make sense of all of them. Look at what you just did. You just did this right now. Isn't that amazing? So if you do the tango all the time, you take people into a new emotional awareness and new ways of engaging with other people, and then when you do it, you give them the message. This makes sense, you're competent, you can do it. And you do this again and again and again and again in therapy sessions. Let me see where, I think I'm supposed to talk for about another 5 minutes and then you guys are going to ask me questions. So I want to flip for a moment and I talk about emotion. It seems to me that many people in the therapy field basically are sort of intimidated by emotion or don't know what to do with it. So I'm just going to do a very fast, forgive me if it's fast, a very fast sort of take on emotion from an EFT point of view. First of all, emotion is a process. And when I talk about it, I talk about assembling emotion with people. Difficult to do. People respond very well. And we have no problem working with people, even PTSD folks, who are out or who don't have access with their emotions. We've never had any problem working with those folks. Okay? In other words, emotions aren't difficult to find and to make sense of if you have a way of doing it. So what is an emotion? Emotion is a trigger a basic perception, which is all about survival, safety, danger, pleasure, pain, right? Pleasant, not pleasant. A trigger, a perception, a body response, a set of meanings, a set of thoughts, and an action tendency. That's what an emotion is. This is the definition of emotion put out by Magda Arnold in 1960, and I've never seen anything better. Okay? That's what she said an emotion was. Notice the last piece is an action tendency. Emotion prepares you to act. It comes from the Latin. It comes from what? It comes from the Latin word immovere, to call. No, sorry. It comes from the Latin word immovere, to move. Emotion, to move, right? So when somebody doesn't know what's happening to them, you simply use this framework. You say, give me the trigger. Give me the trigger, right? What happens? Just before you turn and start getting angry and criticizing her for not being sexy, what happens to you, John? Can you help me talk about the last time that one? What happens? And what did you see? It's the expression on her face. What do you see in her face? She doesn't want me. She doesn't want to be with me. I'm a nuisance. I'm a pain. I'm not what she wants. I'll never be what she wants. I've never been what she wants. Trigger. So the trigger is the look on her face. Yeah? And there's something here that's painful and dangerous. Yes. And what do you feel in your body? I can't breathe. My chest goes tight. I can't breathe. Can you feel it now as you talk about this? Yes, it's right here. Where is it in your body, John? It's right here. It's right here. I can't breathe. And what do you say to yourself, John? I say, here we are again. I knew she's never loved me, this woman. She's never going to love me. And with this client, and sometimes you go here and sometimes you don't, there's a deeper existential reality. Nobody's ever going to love me. I'm alone forever. Nobody's ever going to love me. And then what do you do with that, John? I turn and I tell her, what's wrong with you? So you turn and you protest. You protest her distance. You protest what you see as her refusing to come close and reassure you and love you. He says, yes, yes, that's what it is. I want her to reassure me. And she said, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard you say that before. All you do is talk about orgasms and sex. Right. So I want you to notice that if you use these elements, you can put emotion together pretty easily. And attachment guides you into the triggers and what people's basic fears are and what people's basic longings are. The other issue is that if you believe that there are thousands of emotions, EFT is pretty difficult. I remember reading a book by Sharon Badgley, talking to the Dalai Lama. Everybody wants to talk to the Dalai Lama here, especially about relationships, which is quite funny because he's a monk. But, you know, what Sharon Badgley says in the second page of her book is that there's 1,866 negative emotions. Good Lord! In which case you couldn't possibly do EFT, forget it. So what I want to tell you is, no, that's a little bit of an overestimation. There's actually 6 that you have to worry about in therapy. And this comes from the work of Ekman. If you take other folks like Tompkins, he expands a couple of these into making 8 or 10, depending what book you read. But there's basically 6. There's 6 basic emotions that every single human being on this planet can recognize in another person's face and give the same meaning to. They are anger, which is the movement behind anger. The action tendency is about asserting themselves. It's an approach emotion. It's protesting. It's protesting a frustration of a need. It's calling to somebody and saying, where the hell are you? It's pushing for what you need. And there's a desperation behind it when it's frustrated, right? There's anger, right? There's two positives, surprise and joy. We don't really have to worry about those too much as therapists. People don't usually come into your office and say, I have entirely too much surprise and joy. They just don't. So there's two positives, surprise and joy. Surprise, the action tendency is to pay attention, to engage with something. The same with joy, right? Then there's sadness, which is about grieving, shutting down, giving up a goal, or evoking reassurance from others. And there's, I'm losing my count here, there's sadness, there's fear, and we're interested in the fear of being rejected and abandoned by others. From an attachment point of view, isolation is the mother of all existential fears. Because we are not wired for it, we can't deal with it. It's a problem with no solution. Isolation is the mother of all fears. And then there's shame. And I always think of shame as fears about the self. The self as unworthy, unlovable, incompetent, right? So there's only those 6. And what you're dealing mostly in couple and family therapy with is reactive anger, with all kinds of desperation and terror and hurt underneath that people never show. And you're dealing with, in the end, you're dealing with sadness and loss. You're dealing with shame, fears about the self as unlovable. And you're overwhelmingly dealing with fear. Fear of rejection, abandonment. And they can be in this relationship, or they can be huge and existential. Like there's a training tape I just made. I get confused about the titles of my tapes, I'm sorry. There's a training tape, the most recent one I think, I made with this young woman in our 4-day externships, which is the basic training in EFT, which we do all over North America. We do live sessions. And I did a live consultation with this young woman. And what I realized in the middle of the session is, yes, she's feeling deeply abandoned by her partner and deeply betrayed by her partner. But this feeling I'm getting when I tune into her is huge. It basically tunes into that is where she lives as a human being. She expects to be abandoned. She expects that she will be alone and live her whole life alone. And that paralyzes her. That is truly terrifying. And when she goes into that, from any sign that he's not going to be there, she is completely overwhelmed. And when she's overwhelmed, she can't talk, she can't share with him, she can't do anything. Right? So we take overwhelming emotion, whether it's present right now in this relationship, in this dance, or whether it's on an existential level, we help people take it a little bit at a time in their window of tolerance. We join them in the emotion, we help them make sense of it, regulate it, and then we use it to create new ways of engaging with themselves, with the therapist, with other people. Okay, I've talked a lot very fast here. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you guys. You can find all these things I'm talking about written in the literature. You can find all the literature on the ICEF site. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop and let people ask questions.
Hi, Sue. This is Tim, and I'm standing behind the computer so you can still see the audience. Thanks. I'm just going to open it up. And Sue, just let us know if you can't hear. I'll ask any questions just to stand up and speak up as we're going through.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So what happens when the patient doesn't have the other person to talk? When it's only the person's loss, but there is not a counterpart to process that? And
Yes.
depends on that.
I believe you're talking about individual therapy, are you not?
Yes, correct.
Yes. So they do have the other person because as adults, we carry around the mental representations of our attachment figures in our head, right? So the young woman who comes to me because her husband, who she's been separated from for 5 years, wants to get back with her, and there's part of her that wants that, but every time he talks about it with her, she becomes paralyzed and she can't hear anything he says, and she has anxiety attacks, and she goes back to her apartment and zones out and doesn't know what to do with herself. When we start talking about that, right, she starts talking. It's pretty easy to get to this sense of her sense of self, that this marriage broke up because she's a very moral, she comes from a very moral, rigid family, and this relationship broke up because she had an affair. And her husband wants to forgive her and get back with her, and she says, no, no, no. And you come across this sense of self as shameful, unworthy, inferior. And so she's talking about this with me, and she's talking at 50 miles an hour, 1,000 miles an hour, difficult to listen to. So I reflect, I slow her down, I talk slower, I stay with the feelings, and she starts to talk about how disgusting she was, that she had this affair on this man. She's disgusting, and I ask her to close her eyes and say, who tells you this? Who, if in your life, who has the power to tell you who you are? Who tells you this? And first of all, she says, my father. But she said, when I had the affair, my whole family got together, and they told me I was a bad person, I was a bad wife, I'd shamed them, I'd destroyed the family, I'd hurt everyone in my family, I'd hurt everyone in his family, I'd broken his heart. They told me all this. I said, who do you see saying this to you? She says, it's my father. So we are talking about her relationship with her father, and we start talking about it, and she says, when I grew up, I was the clever one, I was the athletic one, I was the one who was supposed to win the prizes. My dad told me, you have to win this race, you have to get A's on this exam, you're the clever one, you're the one we're counting on, you have to do it. And she said, but it never made any difference what I did. It was never enough. It was never enough. I could never please him. All my siblings got to do whatever, and whatever they did was basically okay, but I could never please him. I was never good enough. And as I slow her down and regulate her emotion and validate her, and I'm present with her, she starts to grieve that. She starts to get into that emotion rather than just regulating it and keeping it away, which she's done her whole life. And she starts to get into that she's not enough. And she wasn't enough in her marriage. And she did betray her husband, and etc., etc., etc. We go into all this sadness and shame. And of course the fear is that if I'm not enough and I can never please you, then I'm also always going to be rejected, because there is something basically wrong with me. So she goes into those fears, and as she goes into them, she talks to me about them, and I say things like, what do you see in my face right now as you tell me this? So I use me, and she looks at me, and she looks at me, and then she looks really puzzled, and she said, you look you look sad. I say, yes, I feel really sad for you when you say this. This must be, you've lived with this for so long. I feel sad for you as you say this. And she weeps. And she says, you feel sad for me? I say, yes, I feel sad sitting listening to you. So here am I'm giving a corrective emotional experience here, right? EFT is a whole series of little corrective emotional experiences of more connection with other people, more regulated emotion, right? So, and she weeps. And then at a certain point in the session, I get her to close her eyes and talk to her dad. And first of all, she can't do it. And gradually, as she begins to listen to her own emotion, she starts to be able to say to her dad, have this imaginal conversation in her head with her dad, where she says to her dad, I wanted so much. I wanted to see that look in your eyes where you thought I was a special kid. I wanted to see that you wanted me and you approved of me. And it was never there, Dad. It was never there. You told me this and that, and I'm grieving for this. It was never there. And she weeps. And then I get her to imagine what her dad says back. So you do it on an imaginal level. And you know, her dad, first of all, says, I don't want to hear this. This is nonsense. I was a good dad to you. And then as we stay with that, her imagined interaction with her father starts to be able to say, well, I always thought you could do better. So I didn't want to hurt you, but my sense was I had to push you to do better. And she starts to be able to have this imaginal conversation with her father about how that left her completely feeling inadequate and alone. So she goes through that emotional process with the attachment figures in her head. And I want to suggest to you that you guys do all that all the time anyway. That you have, your life is full of these conversations with the people you care about in your head. You're always doing this. Right? You're always doing this. There's a drama going on in your head. You know, it's like your job as a therapist is to get to know the people who are talking always inside your clients' heads, telling them about who they are, telling them about how important, inadequate they are, or adequate, telling them whether life's safe or dangerous. This is all going on. So you use the imaginal exposure to attachment figures, and you use the interactions with you, but you're always going for moments of corrective experience where the self is accepted, the emotions are clear and regulated, and the engagement with other people has the possibility of connection in it. You're always going for those corrective emotional experiences. You know, the oldest cliche in the world in therapy, people always argue about who said it. I always make a mistake. I always think it was Alexander and Frank. Somebody told me I was wrong the other day. That change in therapy is, in the end, a corrective emotional experience. That may be a cliche, but I think it's completely true. And it seems to me the field of psychotherapy has fallen in love with teaching people skills or teaching people coping or not going into that corrective emotional experience. It depends what you're looking for. Sometimes people come for therapy looking for a few coping mechanisms. But if you are trying to get what I call a real significant change that's going to last, you've got to have a corrective emotional experience. So you can do it in individual as well as couple and family. That was a bit long. I'll keep it shorter next time.
Good question. Other questions? Yes.
So you talked about using this with clients who have had traumatic experiences. How would you use it for a client who is disassociating in session?
Yes. Disassociating means they're numbing out. Yeah?
Yeah.
So you stay with that. The most extreme case I ever had was with a young woman who didn't speak to me for about 10 weeks. She came in with her family. She was severely anorexic, very depressed and suicidal, and she wouldn't look me in the eye. Her family talked all the time. And then her family basically said they didn't want to come anymore. And I was very worried about her. So I asked her if she would like to come by herself. She just nodded. She wouldn't look at me, she just nodded, right? So she started to come, and she wouldn't speak. I would talk. I would say, "Hi, Sandra. My sense is it's pretty hard for you to come in here, pretty hard for you to come into this hospital, but you come. I think that's amazing that you come, even though it's so hard. And my sense is it's hard to talk to me right now. It's so hard to take the risk of actually opening your mouth and talking to me." And she'd go, right? And I'd say, "Yes, it's part of you, there's part of you." And I'm a very impatient person, and that's irrelevant because I've got to find a way to be with this client. So I had to find levels of patience I never knew I had with this client, okay? So I would say, yes, reflect, present, process. Step 1 of the EFT Tango, reflect, present, process. Yes, some part of you wants to talk to me, right, wants to be with me, so you open your mouth and you breathe like you're going to speak, and then something stops you. Something stops you. And first of all, she'd just look down again, and I'd say, and I'd repeat, you repeat yourself in EFT. It takes time for people to process, especially when they're in foreign territory. I say, and I understand that because I'm just a stranger, you don't know who I am. And my sense is that people are dangerous for you. And she'd look up and she'd nod. So then we got to nod, right? Gradually, she'd nod and smile. And then she'd nod and sit a bit closer to me. And then she'd go, right. And then she'd go, yes. Right, so it was, I'm not kidding you, that was hard work. Because I'm sitting with her and I might say, I don't quite know what to do right now, Sandra, because I'm not sure how to help you, because it's so hard. This is a talk therapy and it's so hard for you to talk to me. Would it help? Is there other way I can help? I could hold up my hand. You could put your hand in mine. Yeah, and she just looks at me like I'm a crazy person, right? So I know that's not a good idea. I said, okay, fine, forget that. I said, I understand that's too much, please forgive me. Notice how I'm just tuning in and being with her. Gradually she starts to talk. And of course, she's been physically abused at home, and for a series of 5 years she's been massively and seriously really deliberately and sadistically sexually abused by a teacher in the school. And the issue is she's tried to tell professionals about it, and her experience is they've never listened to her, right? So she's decided the only way out is to shut down with other people, which means I open my mouth but I don't actually reach for you, I don't try to communicate with you, because I just find out that you're not there for me and that hurts like hell. And she numbs herself out by not eating, so she can't feel her body. So we start to go into that, but it takes patience and time, right? And it took a lot of time to work with her. And she was one of the most seriously, I don't even want to call her disordered, because there was nothing disordered. It was so logical, the trap that she was caught in. You know, it was so logical how she decided that the only way to even live, to take another breath, was to shut down. But that was an extreme example. Most of the time I'm dealing with for example, vets, military vets, who dissociate and shut down, and you just follow them. You follow present process. You stop. You say, I'd like to slow down right now. Could you help me? What happened right there, Jim? Could you help me? Your wife started talking about closeness and connection, and could you help me, Jim? You turned away and your body changed and you sat back in your chair and it's like you went away. He said, what? Yeah, I guess I did. I went away. I said, right. Could you help me? What happened right there? There was something that was very, so you track it, you go into it, you follow it, you stay with it, right? And first of all, people don't know, and you have to tolerate them not knowing. You have to slow down. You have to say, and he says, I don't know. And I say, your wife started to talk about this. We were talking this way, and your wife started to talk. And he says, I don't want to talk about this. I can't talk about this. The emotion itself becomes dangerous. So you validate that. You say there's something here that's difficult or painful or overwhelming, and it's scary even to touch it. He says, yes. I say, I understand that. I understand that. There's only so many things it can be. It's not a mystery. Emotion is not a mystery, okay? It's got to be about aloneness, it's got to be rejection and abandonment, it's got to be about how self is unworthy and therefore will never be connected with. That's what it's got to be about. And so I say, can you help me? Can you even touch that for a moment? What it was that had you running like that? He says, I just don't want to be here, I can't breathe. I say, I understand, there's something here that's so dangerous, about something happened to you, yeah? And I'll just stay there and track it with him. And it emerges, it just emerges. You know, emotion is not, the suppression of emotion is amazingly hard work. This is James Gross's research, okay? You have to physically push it down, and it is such hard work that it rebounds because the arousal involved in pushing it down, right? You just become more and more aroused. So the more you avoid emotion, there's a point where the more it just rebounds, the more aroused you become. So if I stay there, it sounds funny in my head, but I have this thing of 5 times, right? If I stay there 5 times, you're going to start opening up to me. If I'm safe, and if I'm validating, and if I'm with you. And as you open up to me, I validate, I hold you, I regulate, right? And then I ask you to take another step, right? Jim basically goes into shame. Shame is perhaps the most toxic emotion because the action tendency behind shame is to hide and deny the self. You don't want to be seen. And the trouble with that is, when you hide from others, there's no possibility of a corrective emotional experience. There's no possibility of getting comfort and reassurance from another person because you don't show who you are. So it's a trap. It just confirms itself all the time. If you got me, you understand what I'm saying? Right? So, you know, he's talking about that his buddy died. His buddy died in the fight, and it was because he missed the shot. He missed the shot. He had the sniper in his whatever you call that, crosshairs, and he missed the shot. And so his buddy died. And this is unforgivable. This is unforgivable. And he can't look himself in the eye. And she knows that he's a coward. She knows that he's a failure. She knows. And, you know, what she's doing as he starts to talk about this is she's weeping. But he's not looking at her, he's looking at the rug, right? He's hiding. So at one point I say, Jim, this is so difficult for you, this is so hard. And I summarize his feeling, I order it for him. I say, could you just take a breath just for a second and look up in your wife's face? And he looks. I say, what do you see? And you can see him get disorientated. He says, she's weeping. I say, yes, she's weeping. Could you help me? Or maybe, could you think it might even be that she's weeping for you? She's weeping because she sees your pain. She cares about that. Is that right, Sarah? She says, yes, yes. You know, I'm weeping for you. I don't want you to feel this pain. You're a good man. You're a good soldier. You tried to say you're just a human being. You missed the shot. I want you. Are you ever going to come home from the war? I need you. And he says, what did she say? Because he's based, right? So we have to stay there and help him process that. That's a corrective emotional experience. But it started with him dissociating. So when people are blocked in their emotions or in their interactions, if you're an EFT therapist, you walk into the block with them. You walk into the block. And as you walk in and you create safety, the block begins to move, yeah? I think we have a bit more time. Maybe we have time for one more, maybe, if you want.
Sure, one more.
Nice to be with you guys.
Thank you, Sue.
Nice to be with you. I hope I see you sometimes at a talk or at an externship or something. Come up and talk to me.
Will do. Congratulations on your move. Thanks.